Welcome back. We are now at Module 5, Criterion 4, Student Assessment. There are 7 requirements for this criterion. We begin with requirement 4.1. It reads, a variety of assessment methods are shown to be used, and they are shown to be constructively aligned to achieving the expected learning outcomes and the teaching and learning objectives. What is the purpose of assessment? Assessment is basically for students to demonstrate the degree to which the learning outcomes have been achieved. Broadly speaking, assessment is formative, meaning it takes place at all stages of the learning process. Or, stated differently, it is not just summative. Summative meaning assessment only at the end of the learning process. This is an important point because feedback from the assessment is used to continually modify the teaching and learning process so as to achieve better results at the next stage of learning. Assessment has to be well planned to differentiate different degrees of learning proficiency, meaning to differentiate the A's from the B's, from the C's, and so on. There are many assessment methods: multiple choice questions, short answer type questions, essay writing, field work, or practicum presentation, and others. What is important about the use of different assessment methods? We are back at the all-important concept of alignment. The assessment methods need to be aligned to the expected learning outcomes. If an ELO calls for knowledge requirement, then short answer type final examination questions would be an appropriate assessment method. If an ELO calls for knowing how to apply knowledge, then some form of project work would be a more suitable assessment method. Plus, the assessment methods used need to be fairly well assessed the various levels of learning outcome as in Bloom's taxonomy, or a different categorization of learning outcomes if a different taxonomy is used. To recap, 1. The assessment methods used need to be aligned to the ELO requirements. 2. The range of assessment methods used need to broadly assess the different levels of learning. As an example of best practice and assessment, let's look again at the University of Malaya example. Click the link to the Faculty of Medicine at UM. Explore the various links. The faculty provide extensive information on every conceivable part of the program, including the assessment methods used. Note also that information can be freely downloaded. Feel free to browse the downloads. As one example, look at the lecturer guide for microbiology or for parasitology. The student handbook includes much information on student assessment, policies, and procedures. We move on next to principles of assessment. The assessment methods used need to be reliable. What does that mean? To be reliable means that if a test were conducted today, tomorrow, or next week, it would yield the same result. In that way, the outcome is consistent and can be trusted. The results need to also be valid. For a certain result to be valid means for it to be accurate in what it intends to measure. Remember the concepts of content, measure, and construct validity in Module 2, Criterion 1, Expected Learning Outcomes. As an example of validity in student assessment, consider a 2-hour paper and pencil final examination that accounts for 100% of a student's grading for a course. Such a final exam cannot be said to be 100% valid. This is due to the limitation in application, analysis, and evaluation in the use of only a paper and pencil test. Next, assessments need also be fair. The example in the slide shows 5 different animals asked to climb a tree. The test is not fair. It is biased against those animals that cannot climb. For an assessment to be fair, it must not disadvantage any student, including those who do not speak English as a second language. The test must provide all students the same opportunity to achieve the highest grade possible. The last concept in this slide is flexibility. Some degree of flexibility may be called for in certain situations when, for example, students are not able to attend an in-class final examination. Perhaps they can do a take-home exam, or flexibility as in giving 6 quizzes and telling students that only 4 of their highest scoring quizzes will be counted towards the final grade. Let's get into some further details about assessment that are important to consider. Every course in a university needs to be backed up by an assessment rubric. An assessment rubric states 3 things explicitly. 1. What are the criteria used in the assessment? 2. What are the various levels of performance or proficiency? 3. The rubric provides a description of the various levels of performance. This is a generic example of an assessment rubric. What are the criteria or what is assessed? There is the various levels of performance and there is the description of what each level is. The next 3 slides are 3 examples of assessment rubrics. Each can be improved. Either individually or as a group, go through each example with a view to critiquing and improving the rubric. Take about 15 minutes to improve each rubric. You are free to change the parameters stated in the rubrics. You may, for example, add 1 or more criteria of assessment. You may remove existing criteria of assessment. You may modify them. You can change the weights if you deem appropriate. You can change the percentages. You can and should change some of the descriptions or the marking scales used. All 3 rubrics need to be improved. We come back to the all-encompassing concept of alignment. The credit for this slide is from several AUN-QA senior assessors who developed it. From Criterion 1, the expected learning outcomes of the program need to be aligned to what stakeholders require. From Criterion 3, the teaching and learning methods used need to be aligned with the educational philosophy, aligned with the learning taxonomy applied in the program, and aligned with the ELOs or what the program is expected to teach. From this criterion, the assessment methods have to be aligned to what is taught, and they need to be valid, reliable, and have some degree of flexibility in meeting the ELO requirements. There is alignment also in the various levels of a curriculum. Every program needs to have its basic, intermediate, and advanced courses. We already know that there needs to be alignment in the learning outcomes, some requiring low-order thinking, some requiring mid-order thinking, and those requiring higher-order thinking. Alignment in assessment means to require some knowledge recall, some knowledge application, and also a degree of knowledge creation. Alignment in teaching and learning means to have various types of methods in use: direct instruction, indirect instruction, experiential learning, interactive learning, and also independent study. The alignment traverses vertically among the various levels of each concept. The alignment also traverses horizontally across the 4 concepts. Psychologist Dr. John Biggs in 1999 coined the term constructive alignment to describe the interplay among the ELOs, the teaching and learning activities, and the assessment methods applied. Constructive alignment is a key concept in designing an effective educational system. I like to use a closer-to-home example to further illustrate the concept. It is the example that I touched on earlier. Parents teach their children what the children need to do, how to behave, and so on. The children construct meaning out of the parents' instructions and teaching. When both parents are aligned, their instructions and teaching are consonant, and there is just one single message. The child understands exactly what is required of him or her. There is alignment in this case. But when the parents' views differ, when one says to do one thing, but the other says to do something else, the child gets confused and is not able to construct a consonant picture of what is required. In that case, there is no alignment. So, having discussed concepts in student assessment, we now look at the requirements one by one. Requirement 4.1. Use a variety of assessment methods. They must, 1. With proper documentation shown to be aligned to achieving the expected learning outcomes and the teaching and learning objectives. And 2. Be aligned to the learning taxonomy applied in the program. That is, they must test for proficiency in the various levels or categories of learning outcomes defined. Some would test for recall, others would test for understanding, and yet others would test for application, evaluation, and so on. Requirement 4.2. Every assessment system needs to have an appeals policy. When students do not agree with the grade given to them, what do? The appeals policy spells out the procedure that students need to go through to have their grades and markings reviewed. The policy needs to be communicated to all students. It must be explicit, spell out clearly what is involved, and it must be applied consistently. This has to be written in the student handbook. You may want to look again at the information communicated to students in the University of Malaya student handbooks. Note also the publication of an updated handbook every year, and the previous year's handbooks are still shown in the websites. Requirement 4.3 is to show that the examinations, homeworks, and other assessments have good reliability and validity, and that they are fair and have some degree of flexibility in application. The assessments need to be also construct valid as discussed in Module 2, Criterion 1, Expected Learning Outcome, and that these information are communicated to students explicitly and applied to all courses consistently. Earlier, we went through the exercise of improving one or more assessment rubrics. At a minimum, an assessment rubric has to show the criteria of assessment, the various levels of performance as specified by the teachers, and a description of what it means to achieve each performance level. And an assessment rubrics has to be shown for every course in the program. You have probably surmised that assessment rubrics are tedious to construct, but consider the positive aspects of producing them. It takes an intimate knowledge of the course material and the learning outcomes in order to construct an assessment rubric. Each rubric is ideally suited to its particular course. A well-created assessment rubric only serves to increase the alignment among what is taught, what is assessed, and what the learning outcomes demand of the student. A well-constructed assessment rubric also makes the marking or assessment process easier and transparent when multiple lecturers are involved in teaching the same large course, which is often the case. Every lecturer follows the same rubric, and this leads to higher inter-lecturer marking consistency. This slide on requirement 4.5 shows the need for alignment within each box. Let's call this small picture alignment. And the need for alignment among the three boxes. Let's call this big picture alignment. All aspects of the teaching and learning activities have to be aligned, from the educational philosophy to the teaching and learning methods used, to the learning environment, to the learning taxonomy applied. And all aspects of the assessment process need to be aligned also, including the use of various assessment methods to test various levels of learning proficiency. For the big picture alignment, what is taught and what is assessed must be aligned to the learning outcomes required of the students. Requirement 4.6 is fairly straightforward. After the assessment has been made, this must be fed back to the students. How long does it take before students receive their assessment results? 2 weeks? 1 week? 3 days? A specific duration is not stated for this requirement. Remember the earlier discussion about the AUN-QA not being rule-based? To be rule-based would be to specify the maximum number of days before students receive their grade. This requirement simply states that the feedback has to be provided in a timely manner. The assessment process will be looked at with a view to seeing if the duration can be shortened. Other questions to be asked might be, can students receive their feedback online? Or can students scan a QR code to see their examination results? How can the assessment results be pushed to students instead of them having to pull their results from the system? The last requirement of Criterion 4 calls for the big picture alignment point discussed earlier. Alignment between the assessment methods applied and how they work towards achieving the expected learning outcome. That this process needs to be periodically reviewed, with input coming from the graduates, the alumni, and the employers. How to better assess whether students have achieved the expected learning outcomes based on how they are performing on their jobs. Use the PDCA approach from cycle to cycle in improving the assessment process. We have come to the end of Module 5, Criterion 4, Student Assessment. The next is Module 6, Criterion 5, that will spell out the requirements of the academic staff.